The Metallurgy Institute on Prime stood like a mountain that had been shaped by gods. Its stone walls rose up from the ground and disappeared into clouds. Had heard stories about this place before she came here. Teachers on Earth had told her that this institute was the best place in the entire galaxy to learn how to work with metals. Now she was here, and it was real. Was 23 years old. She had red hair that she kept tied back, and her shoulders were narrow from years of working in Earth laboratories instead of doing physical labor. She was not strong like the other students. She was not tall. She was not impressive to look at. But she was here because she had passed tests that showed she could think about problems in ways that most students could not. The forge hall was enormous. It was bigger than 10 football fields. The ceiling was so high that had to look up for a long time to see it. Along the walls were 30 forges, each one burning with intense heat. The air tasted like metal and smoke. Metal dust covered every surface. The master instructor was named. He was which meant his skin was made of a material that looked like polished metal. His body was twice as large as, and his strength was visible in every movement. When he walked, the ground seemed to feel his weight. When he spoke, his voice made the metal hanging on the walls vibrate and ring. Looked at all 30 students. He did not smile, almost never smiled. "Today you begin your final test in this institute," said. His words were simple but hard. "You will forge a blade, not a knife, not a tool, a real blade that can be used as a weapon. You have one complete solar cycle, 26 hours of work time, nothing more." He paused and let his eyes move from one student to the next. "The blade must be able to cut through standard military materials. It must not break when force is applied to it. It must keep its edge sharp after use. If you complete this task, you will graduate. If you fail, you will leave this institute today. There are no second chances. There are no extra days." Felt her heart beat faster. She looked at the other students. Most of them were aliens. There were 5, each one with skin that glowed like metal. There were 6 who had bodies made of crystal that reflected light in strange ways. There were natives who had skin the color of stone. There were creatures from other worlds that did not even have names for. And there was her, one human girl from a planet that had only entered the galactic community 90 years ago. "You may select your materials now," said. He gestured toward massive shelves that held every kind of metal. Some of the metals glowed. Some were dark as night. Some were so heavy that the shelves bent under their weight. The students moved first. They selected the biggest, heaviest metals. They chose materials that glowed with power. One of them, a student named, picked up a piece of metal that was larger than its entire body. He held it easily in one hand and laughed. "This will make a proper blade," he said to the other, "not like the weak human will make." Ignored him. She had studied the Institute's library for 2 weeks before the test began. She had read old human texts that her people had created thousands of years ago. She had read modern books about how metals worked at the smallest level. She had made plans for exactly what she would do. Moved toward the shelves, but not to the biggest materials. Instead, she went to the materials that looked ordinary. She selected 7 different metals. Each one was smaller than her head. Some of them looked cheap and worthless. The other students watched her with confusion and then with something that looked like pity. A student named watched her gather materials, had crystal that was bright blue, almost like the color of Earth's oceans. "Are you sure about those choices?" asked. His voice was polite but curious. "Those metals are not strong. They will not make a good blade." Nodded at him. "I know what I am doing," she said. It was not rude, but it was clear. Assigned each student to a forge. Forge was at the far end of the hall, away from the other students. She was alone there, which suited her. She had work to do, and she needed to think clearly. Began by preparing her materials. She did not start with the hottest fires like the other students did. Instead, she used careful temperatures, measuring everything with instruments that she had brought with her from Earth. The other students used their strength and instinct, used mathematics and patience. She took the first metal, a substance that was commonly used in Earth construction. Most people thought it was too weak for real use, but knew something different. She knew that this metal had a specific property when it was treated in a particular way at a particular temperature. She began to heat it. Hours passed. The other students worked quickly and with impressive power. Was already shaping his massive blade, striking it with a hammer that was the size of a human child. The sound of his strikes filled the entire forge hall. Other students using strength and speed to force their metals into the shapes they wanted. Heated her first metal slowly. She watched its color change. When it reached exactly the right moment, she began to fold it into itself. She used a smaller hammer than the others. She struck more carefully. Each strike had a purpose. Each movement followed a plan. By the end of the first work period, had completed the first part of her process. She had created the first layer of her blade. It was not impressive to look at. It was small and thin and weak-looking. The other students had already shaped the main forms of their blades. This blade was nearly complete. It was magnificent and terrifying. The other and had impressive weapons forming in their forges. Cleaned her materials and prepared for the next layer. She would add the second metal tomorrow. She would follow her plan exactly just as she had studied. She did not think about how her blade looked compared to the others. She did not think about what it said about her being weak. She thought only about what she knew, about the science of metals, about what her ancestors had learned over thousands of years, about the fact that strength was not always the most important thing in the world. Went back to her dormitory and slept. Tomorrow would bring the second layer, and the day after that would bring the third, and on the sixth day, when everyone else was finished, she would finally heat and shape her complete blade into its final form. By the third day of the test, word had spread through the institute. The students who were not taking the test had heard rumors. The human girl was doing something strange. She was not making progress like the other students. She had barely visible progress to show. Came to inspect the work during the evening hours. He walked from forge to forge, examining each blade as it took shape. The blades were nearly complete. They were massive and brutal, designed to be used with physical strength. The blades were delicate in a different way, using their crystal nature to create weapons that could refract energy and light. The blades followed the old traditions of their people, with curves and patterns that had been used for thousands of years. When reached forge, he stopped. He looked at what she had created so far. It was 5 layers of metal, stacked and folded together. Each layer was a different color. They were bonded in ways that should not have been possible. The combination did not follow any known principle of metal working. "What are you making?" asked. His voice was neutral but could hear the confusion in it. "A blade," said. She did not look up from her work. "Like you asked." "This is not a blade," said. He gestured at the layers. "This is an experiment. This is not how metals are properly worked. You are heating them incorrectly. You are bonding them at temperatures that should not allow bonding. You are wasting time and materials." Finally looked at him. "The materials are not wasted," she said. "Every temperature is correct for what I am doing. Every layer is exactly where it should be." Did not argue, he simply moved on to the next forge, but noticed that he did not dismiss her work. He had not told her to stop. That was something. That night in the dormitory, students talked about what they had seen. Some of them laughed about the human girl and her strange layered metal. But the blue student was troubled. He went to his room and asked to speak with her. Let him in. Her room was small and clean. There were books everywhere. Some were from Earth. Some were from the Institute library. Some were old texts that had been digitized and downloaded to her reading device. "Why are you making layers?" asked. He sat down carefully in a chair that was too small for his crystal body. "I have never seen anyone forge a blade that way. It is not efficient." Sat across from him. "On Earth, we learned about metals before we had strong machines," she said. "We did not have the physical strength that your people have, so we learned different ways. We learned that if you treat metals in specific ways, you can make them stronger and better without needing huge strength." Leaned forward. "Explain this to me." Picked up a data pad and showed him diagrams. She showed him how each layer in her blade served a purpose. The first layer was designed to absorb shock. The second layer would maintain the edge of the blade. The third layer would give strength without adding too much weight. The fourth layer would help the blade flex slightly without breaking. The fifth layer was the outer protection. "When you put all of these together correctly," said, "you create something that is strong in every way. It will not break easily. It will keep a sharp edge. It will be faster and lighter than a solid blade, but it will be just as tough." Studied the diagrams for a long time. "This is different," he said finally. "It is not worse, it is just different." "Yes," agreed. "The other students will not understand," said. "When your blade is finished, they will judge it by how it looks. They will compare it to their large, impressive weapons. They will think you have failed." "That is possible," said, "but they are wrong about what makes a weapon good. Strength is not everything." The next 3 days passed slowly. Continued her work, adding the 6th layer and then the 7th. Each addition required careful heating and precise timing. She could not rush the process. If she rushed, the layers would not bond properly and the entire blade would be ruined. The other students were now finishing their blades. His blade was complete. It was 4 feet long and weighed as much as his entire body. The metal was so dark it looked black, and the edge caught the light in sharp, dangerous ways. When held it, he looked like a god of war. The other had similarly impressive weapons. Their blades were not identical to his, but they followed the same principle. Large, heavy, strong, built with the kind of power that only a could use. The blades were finished as well. They were beautiful in a different way. His blade was slender and elegant, with internal crystal structures that caught and reflected light. Another student, a female named Lyra, had created a blade that had a gentle curve and seemed to almost glow from within. His blade was still being worked on. She was now shaping the metal into its final form. It was much smaller than the others. When she held it against its massive weapon, her blade looked like a toothpick. Some of the students actually laughed when they saw the size difference. But was not concerned about size. She was thinking about function. She was thinking about what would happen when the blades were actually tested. On day 5 began the final shaping. She heated her blade to a precise temperature and began to work it into its final form. She used a technique that was thousands of years old, a method that Earth blacksmiths had developed before their civilization had even traveled to other continents. The handle took her 2 hours to complete. She wrapped it with material that came from Earth leather, treated with compounds from that would make it more durable. The grip was not flashy or impressive. It was simply perfect for human hands. It was balanced and practical. When finished, she held her blade up to the light. It was small compared to the others. It was thin. It looked almost fragile. But when light moved across it, the 7 layers became visible. They showed the pattern of her work, the careful steps she had taken. The blade seemed to have its own subtle light coming from within. Placed the blade carefully on a stand near her forge. She cleaned her work area. The testing ground was behind the institute, far away from the city and any buildings that might be damaged. It was a massive courtyard made of stone that had been cut and shaped thousands of years ago. The stone was very hard. It had been used for testing weapons for so long that it was marked with thousands of cuts and dents from blades and strikes and impacts. All 30 students came to watch the testing. Teachers and instructors came as well. The council members from the institute came to evaluate the results. Stood at the center of the courtyard, and he looked very serious. Each student will demonstrate their blade, announced. You will perform 3 tasks. First, you will strike the cutting target. This is standard metal reinforced to resist damage. A good blade will cut through it cleanly. A poor blade will bounce off or crack. Second, you will use your blade to cut through repeated targets, showing that your edge will remain sharp. Third, you will hit the impact stone. A proper weapon must be able to withstand force without breaking. Gestured to the targets that had been set up. The cutting target was a panel of metal about 1 inch thick. The repeated targets were smaller panels that had been arranged in a line. The impact stone was a massive block of the same stone that made up the courtyard. We will begin with the students, said. When first, he approached the cutting target with his massive blade held high. He was a huge figure, his body strong and powerful. He raised the blade above his head and brought it down with tremendous force. The impact was loud. It echoed across the courtyard. The blade cut through the metal panel, but the cut was rough. It was a powerful strike, but not a clean one. The metal bent and twisted where the blade had passed through, turned and looked satisfied. The other students performed their tests. They all cut through the metal panels. They all hit the impact stone hard enough that pieces of stone flew away. Their blades were impressive and strong. There was no question that they were real weapons. The students went next. Their approach was different. They moved with more precision and less power, approached the cutting target and made a clean, calculated strike. His blade passed through the metal as if it was almost nothing. The cut was perfect. There were no rough edges. There was no damage to the surrounding metal. Lyra performed equally well. Her blade was different in design, but it was just as effective. They had learned their craft over millions of years, and their skill showed in every movement and every result. The other alien students from and other worlds performed their tests. Their results were generally good. Some of the blades were excellent, some were less impressive, but all of them were real weapons that worked the way weapons should work. Finally, it was time for to test her blade. She walked to the center of the courtyard. She was small compared to everyone else. The students who had laughed at her blade during construction now watched with curiosity. They wanted to see what would happen when a human's strange creation met the testing targets. Approached the cutting target. She took the blade in both hands. Her hands were small and not very strong compared to the hands of the... She stood with her feet positioned carefully. She had practiced this motion hundreds of times on Earth. She raised the blade and brought it down. The motion was not a display of strength. It was a display of technique. The blade moved with perfect control. The cut was incredibly clean. The blade passed through the metal panel and separated it into two perfect pieces. The cut was so clean that if someone had looked at the two pieces, they would have seen that the metal almost wanted to stay together. The edges were perfect. There was no damage. There was no rough part. There was no wasted force. The courtyard was silent. Stepped forward and examined the cut panel. He looked at both pieces. He ran his hand along the edge. Then he looked at with an expression of something like shock. "Continue," he said. Move to the line of repeated targets. There were 10 of them. Most students could cut through 4 or 5 before their blades started to dull. Wanted to see how many cuts a blade could make before the edge failed. Began to cut. The first panel separated perfectly. The second panel cut cleanly. The third, the fourth, the fifth, she did not change how she moved. She did not apply extra force. She simply cut with the same precision and technique every time. By the 10th panel, her blade was still sharp. When she set down the blade, the edge was as sharp as it had been when she started. The other students were now staring at her openly. They had not expected this. The impact stone said, "Walk to the massive block of stone." She had only seen strike this stone. The impact had been tremendous. Pieces had scattered across the courtyard, but would not use strength. She had a different plan. She examined the stone carefully. She moved around it, looking at its surface. Every stone has weaknesses. Every solid object has places where it is more vulnerable than other places. Found one of these weaknesses. She positioned her blade. She adjusted her feet and her balance. Then she struck. The impact was not as loud as strike. It was not as visibly powerful, but something happened that shocked everyone watching. The stone broke, not cracked, broke. It shattered into pieces as if it had been hit by an explosive device. The force that blade had delivered had traveled through the stone along its natural weakness and split it apart from within. Raised his hand. The silence in the courtyard was complete. "Bring me the blades," said, "all of them." The students brought their weapons. Examined each blade carefully. He looked at its massive weapon. He tested its crystal blade. He checked Lyra's curved weapon, then he took its blade. He held it up so that everyone could see it. The 7 layers were visible now, showing the entire pattern of her work. The handle was simple but perfect. The edge was still sharp enough to cut through the silk that asked someone to bring from the institute. "This is a true weapon," said. His voice was loud and clear. "Not just something that can damage an enemy. This is something that will function perfectly for 1,000 years if it is maintained. This blade will never dull beyond repair. This blade will never break unless it is struck by something equally exceptional." He looked at each of the other blades. "The rest of you have created good weapons," said. "You have used strength and power and your natural abilities. You have created things that will work for a time, but this blade is different. This blade was created by understanding, by knowledge, by methods learned over thousands of years of experience." Looked directly at. "You have passed," he said. "You have not just passed. You have shown us something that we did not expect. You have shown that the way that the older civilizations do things is not the only way. You have shown that humans can teach us things about our own craft." Messages began to arrive within hours of the test results being announced. This dormitory room received communication from every major faction in the Galactic Council. Some messages were offers of employment. Some were requests for her to teach at other institutes. Some were demands that she come work for specific governments and armies. The Federation of States offered her a position with a salary so large that had to calculate it 3 times to understand what the number meant. The collective asked her to join their research institute and promised her unlimited resources. The government wanted to hire her as a weapons designer. But there were also other messages. Some of them were less friendly. One message came from someone in the military saying that certain people thought human knowledge about weapons was a danger that needed to be controlled. Another message suggested that should consider leaving the institute immediately or she might face problems. Called to his personal chamber. This was unusual. Students almost never entered the private chambers of the master instructors, was nervous as she climbed the long stairs inside the institute's central tower. His chamber was large and filled with ancient texts. The walls were covered with books. There were also holographic displays showing information about metals and forging techniques. Was very old for a. His skin had patterns on it that showed age and experience. "Sit," said, pointing to a chair. Sat down, she held her hands together to stop them from shaking. "You have caused a great problem," said. It was not a question. "I only made a blade," said, "like you asked me to." "Yes," agreed, "but you made something much more important than a blade. Do you understand what you have done?" "Thought about this? I proved that humans can do something that other species do well." "No," said, "you proved something more dangerous. You proved that strength is not the most important thing in the galaxy. You proved that thinking can matter more than physical power. You proved that an older way of doing things can be improved by a younger species." Stood up and walked to one of his holographic displays. He brought up information about human history on Earth. "Humans are young in the galaxy," said. "You have been traveling through space for less than a century. Your civilization is billions of years younger than ours. They have controlled much of the galaxy because we are strong. They have held power through their intelligence and the way light and energy work in their bodies. They have their traditions and their old ways." He turned to face. "But now a human has walked into our most respected institute and created something that is better than what our experienced students created. And more importantly, she created it using methods that are based on something that the older species never thought of as important. She created it using knowledge gained through patience and study instead of power." Gestured to a data crystal on his desk. "This crystal contains all of the information about how you made your blade. It contains your methods. It contains your design. It contains the formulas and temperatures and sequences that you used. I am going to give this to you, but I need to warn you about what will happen because of what you have accomplished." Took the crystal. It was warm in her hand. "There are factions in the council that do not want humans to rise in power," said. "They will offer you things. They will offer you money so large that you could buy cities on any planet in the galaxy. They will offer you positions where you would have authority and power. They will do all of this to try to convince you to keep this knowledge secret. They want you to promise that only a few elite humans will learn these methods. They want to control knowledge so that human advancement is limited." Looked at the data crystal. "What should I do?" she asked. "What humans have always done when you have faced power that was greater than yours," said. "You have adapted. You have found new ways. You have refused to be controlled. You have spread your knowledge so widely that it cannot be stopped." He sat back down across from. "But I will warn you," continued. "If you choose to spread this knowledge freely, your life will change. Some people will love you for it. Some people will hate you for it. The power structure of the entire galaxy will begin to shift. Your choices will affect not just you, but every human who will live in the future." "That is a lot of responsibility," said quietly. "Yes," said, "but you made the blade. You proved that humans could do this. That responsibility was given to you the moment you completed your work." Stayed in his chamber for another hour. He told her stories about the history of the galaxy. He told her about wars fought over resources and power. He told her about species that had learned to work together and species that had always competed. "The galaxy is not evil or good," said. "It is simply the way it is. Power flows to those who have it, but sometimes knowledge can create new kinds of power, and when that happens, everything changes." 2 weeks later, left the institute. She had graduated with the highest honors in the history of the program. She had received every offer that the council could make, and she had refused all of them. Instead, she returned to Earth. She left the data crystal and a letter with before she departed, but that was not the end of her work. It was only the beginning. On Earth, in a city that had been important to human history, found a place that had once been used for blacksmithing. It was an old building that was no longer used. She bought it with money that she had saved before coming to the institute. She began to set up forges. She brought materials with her she brought the knowledge and experience that she had gained. She began to prepare to teach others. The first people who came to her academy were humans, other young people from Earth who wanted to learn what had discovered. But soon, others began to arrive. A warrior came first. He had heard about the human girl who had made a perfect blade. He wanted to understand how it had been done. Then an engineer arrived. She was curious about the principles of layering and how weakness could become strength. A native came as well, wanting to learn a new approach to forging that combined his people's ancient traditions with human innovation. More students arrived from dozens of worlds. They came because they had heard that was teaching something different. She was teaching that there were many ways to solve problems, that strength was not the only path, that knowledge could be just as important as power. Watched this development from the Institute. He received reports about the academy that had started. He received word that students from hundreds of worlds were applying to learn with her. 10 years after founded her academy, the building had grown. What had started as a single forge hall was now a complex of workshops and laboratories and teaching spaces. The old blacksmith building had been expanded and rebuilt. New structures had been added. There were dormitories for students from other worlds. There were libraries filled with knowledge from across the galaxy. Stood in the main forge hall and watched the students work. There were humans here, of course, but there were also and creatures from 100 other worlds. They were working together. They were teaching each other. They were learning that the best solutions came when different species shared their knowledge. The forge hall was filled with the sounds of work, hammers striking metal, furnaces burning, water hissing as hot metal was cooled. But underneath these sounds there was something else. There was conversation. There was the sound of people explaining things to each other. There was the sound of knowledge being shared. This academy had become famous, not just on Earth, but across the entire galaxy. Students waited for years to be admitted. Universities on 100 worlds offered scholarships to their best students who wanted to study at this academy. But the real change was something deeper. Had taught her students not just how to forge metal using human methods, but why those methods worked. She had taught them to think about problems differently. She had taught them that innovation came from asking questions that no one had asked before. Slowly, young people from across the galaxy began to spread this way of thinking. Engineers started to question if strength was always the best solution. Scientists began to study old Earth techniques to see if there was wisdom hidden in old methods. Inventors combined their traditional knowledge with human adaptability. A named Karch graduated from this academy and returned to his home world. He became an engineer. He used human-inspired methods to design weapons that were not larger or stronger, but smarter. His designs used less material but were just as effective. He designed tools that could use more efficiently, his methods. Soon, the military forces of the states were using human principles in their engineering. A name took what she learned and applied it to medicine. They had always used their crystal nature to heal, but they had not thought about using chemical methods the way humans did, combined both approaches. She created medicines that worked faster and better than anything that had been created before. She trained others in these new methods. Soon, doctors were teaching humans what they had learned, and humans were teaching them in return. The changes spread like ripples in water. They started small and moved outward, affecting everything they touched. 5 years after founded her academy, the Galactic Council officially recognized human contributions to science and engineering. This was not a small thing. It meant that humans could be hired by any government. It meant that human knowledge was considered valuable. It meant that the old power structure, where strength determined everything, was changing. But not everyone was happy about these changes. There were factions that did not want humans to have power. There were military leaders who saw human knowledge as a threat. There were politicians who worried that if young species could innovate quickly, they would lose their position of importance. These people created a movement called the Purity Coalition. They said that each species should keep its knowledge to itself. They said that mixing knowledge from different species was dangerous. They said that humans especially should not be allowed to teach other species. The Purity Coalition tried to stop this academy. They brought legal challenges. They tried to prevent students from other worlds from coming to Earth. They created propaganda that said humans were inferior and should not be trusted with advanced knowledge. But they failed. The students kept coming. Teachers from other worlds came to learn from. Scientists and engineers began to cite human techniques in their research. The old way of thinking could not compete with the new way. Came to visit the academy when he was very old. He had retired from the institute. He came to see what it built, met him at the entrance to the main forge hall. She did not greet him with formal words. She simply said, "I followed your advice." Nodded, "Yes," he said, "I can see that." They walked through the academy together. watched the students working. He watched a human teaching how to layer metals. He watched a showing humans how to work with light-based materials. He watched a native explaining ancient techniques to a group of young aliens who had never seen these methods before. "The blade still exists," said as they walked. "I keep it in the museum building. I do not display it as a triumph of human superiority. I display it as a tool that demonstrated a principle, that different approaches can be better than just being stronger or older." "Do you regret any of your choices?" asked. "Thought about this. I regret that the Purity Coalition exists," she said. "I regret that some people are afraid of change, but I do not regret spreading this knowledge. I do not regret showing that humans could contribute something valuable." They entered his personal office. It was a simple room filled with books and data crystals. On one wall, there was a shelf that held a copy of her original blade. Beside it was a display showing all of the different blades that had been created by her students. There were human blades and blades and blades and blades from 100 different species, but they all showed the principle that had demonstrated. They all showed layers. They all showed knowledge combined with technique. "What will happen next?" asked. "Humans will continue to innovate," said. "We will take what we know from other species and combine it with our own ways of thinking. We will make mistakes. We will create things that do not work, but we will also create new solutions that no one has thought of before." She looked at the old, and that is what will change the galaxy. Not weapons, not power, but the ability to think differently, the ability to see problems in new ways, the ability to adapt and innovate and share knowledge. Picked up a data crystal from her desk. It contained the records of 1,000 innovations that had been created in its academy. Designs for buildings that used less material but were stronger. Methods for growing food in harsh environments. Medical techniques that combined crystal-based healing with human chemical knowledge. Engineering solutions that used principles from 6 different species. "This is the real blade," said, holding up the crystal. "Not the weapon you forged. This is the weapon you created when you decided to teach." Smiled. "I only showed them how to make a blade," she said. "They taught themselves how to think." Stayed at the academy for 3 weeks. He attended classes. He watched students learn. He saw young people from different worlds work together to solve problems. He saw the future that had created. When he left to return to Prime, he carried with him a blade that one of students had made. It was made by a young who had learned human methods. The blade showed both strength and precision. It showed the beginning of a new era. 30 years later, humans held important positions in every major government in the galaxy. They were scientists and engineers and architects and teachers. They had not achieved this through conquest or force. They had achieved it through knowledge and innovation and the willingness to share what they knew. The blade that had forged was kept in a museum on Earth. It was one of the most important artifacts in human history, but few people who looked at it understood its real significance. The significance was not that a human had made something as good as what older species could make. The significance was that it had proven that a young species could teach old ones, that innovation could matter more than power, that the future of the galaxy belonged not to those who were strongest, but to those who could adapt, think, and share knowledge with each other. And in a small building that had once been a simple blacksmith's workshop, continued to teach. Students came from across the galaxy. They learned her methods, and then they went home and created their own innovations. The blade was important, but the teacher was immortal. The blade that had forged was becoming legendary, but the real legacy was not the blade itself. The real legacy was what the blade represented. It represented the idea that a young species could teach an old one, that different ways of thinking could improve even the oldest traditions, that humans, despite being young and weak, had something valuable to contribute to the galaxy. And that was much more dangerous and much more powerful than any weapon could ever be. The council members were writing notes. Some of them looked confused. Some of them looked impressed. Some of them looked worried. Held her blade in her hands and said nothing. She was thinking about what would happen next. She was thinking about what it said about teaching the older civilizations. She was thinking about how dangerous knowledge could be. Gathered her tools. She had 6 hours of work time left, but she was finished. Her blade was complete. Came by during the evening inspection. He saw that it stopped working. He walked to her forge and picked up her blade. He held it carefully, turning it in the light. He did not speak. He simply examined it, feeling the balance, testing the edge against his fingernail. After several minutes, he put the blade back on its stand. He looked at with an expression that she could not read. Tomorrow, said, we will test these weapons. That night slept well. She had done everything she could. The rest was up to the tests themselves. She was not worried. She knew exactly what would happen. Dreamed of sharp edges and perfect geometry.